The Bible, fact or fiction? Well, for centuries, scholars and archaeologists have been trying to dig up evidence so they can answer that very question. And it's a question that plagued Timothy Mahoney as well.
Filmmaker Timothy Mahoney wanted to see if the stories he had read in the Bible were true. He interviewed the world's leading archaeologists about one key story, when the Israelites supposedly left Egypt, or what is better known in the Bible as the Book of Exodus. Without this story proving true, the entire credibility of the Old Testament and Christianity would be in question. In his documentary and book, Patterns of Evidence, Timothy shares the archaeological finds he and his team uncovered and shows how this evidence is a game changer in favor of one of the most critical events in ancient Bible history.
Well, Tim Mahoney is here with us now, and Tim, welcome to the 700 Club.
Well, thank you for having me.
This whole journey for you really began with the crisis of faith. Talk about that.
Right. You know, in the beginning, I actually was looking for the route of the Exodus, and I thought, well, let's start where it begins, in the Delta. And so I went to that location, and I found out that they were digging the very location that the Bible says the Israelites would have come to. And when I got there, I said, have you found evidence for the early Israelites? And the Egyptologist said, so far, not.
Wow. So what did you think? What was it that initially even made you want to go there and examine all of this?
Well, I was raised in a single-parent home, but my mother was a devout believer, and we had devotions, like so many people. We would read a Bible story at night, and so my mother put great faith, you know. I was raised in the very, you know, we were poor, put it that way, and so she used that faith and instilled it in us. And so when I had the chance to go search for the stories of the Bible, you know, I wanted to do it because there was so much we had invested in it. And
actually, the story of Egypt and all that happened to the Israelites there is critical to our faith.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, it's foundational. That story, it actually is mentioned about 100 to 150 times. Don't forget what God did by bringing you up out of Egypt. It's all through the Old Testament, and Jesus actually talks about Moses often. So, I mean, if that didn't happen, then the whole thing is, it's a big problem.
Well, some of what's been said is that it happened in the time of Ramses,
right,
which would have been, what,
about 1250 BC.
1250 BC. But are you saying that the timeline's off in that?
Well, that's ultimately what ends up happening, is that for the last 60 years, here's how critical this is. There hasn't been any real archaeology at this time of Ramses. But what happened was that there's a city beneath the city of Ramses, which is older, which is called the city of Avaris. And so the question that the film raises, and what I ended up having to do, was to say, well, what would happen if we just looked at the whole history of Egypt and the whole history in Canaan and said, well, what are the main events the Bible talks about? And we found 6 major events, and we said, can we find them anywhere in the history? And yes, we do, but we find them earlier.
So we're off and kind of skewed in our timeline with all of that. Talk about Avaris. I think people who've not ever been to that part of the world might find it interesting to know that there are layers of civilizations on top of each other. So talk about Avaris and the discovery there.
Well, Avaris is a city underneath the city of Ramesses. And what they ended up seeing there, as the archaeologists uncovered it, and they take seasons where they dig a section and then they'll uncover it and they'll find artifacts. What they found out was that just as the story of the Bible talks about, it appears as if this small group of Semitic people came, and as the Egyptologist Manfred Bitek says, they came freely, as if they were allowed to come in there, and they grow. And in this very same place is an unusual palace. And this palace is not owned by an Egyptian, but it's owned by a Semitic person. He's got red hair, light-colored skin, and this type of coat that Egyptologist David Rowe says looks like a coat of many colors.
Really?
And a throw stick on his shoulder. So many people who looked at this said this exactly matches, like a hand in a glove, the story of the early Israelites arriving.
Wow. Talk a little bit, if you will, about the plagues, because that was of particular interest to you. And what did you discover?
Well, in the whole area of the plagues, what ends up happening is we talked about timelines. There's an Egyptian timeline and there's a biblical timeline. So as we were looking for these patterns, we came up to judgment. That's the fourth pattern we look for. And what you see is there's a document called the Admonitions of an Egyptian Sage. Ipwar is his name. And he actually starts writing about what happens to Egypt when calamity happens. And it matches these different, there's many things he wrote about, but there's a number of them that match the story. The Bible says that, you know, the river will turn to blood and no one will be able to drink of it. And that's exactly what Ipwar says. The river has turned to blood and you can't drink of it.
Which makes sense. When something that huge happens, that someone would have recorded something.
Right, and there's numerous recordings of matching just like it, even to the point where it says that the rich have become poor and the slaves are wearing jewelry and they've got clothing. That's exactly what happened when, at the very end of it, they gave the Israelite slaves possessions. So just this whole topsy-turvy thing was being described that many Egyptologists say matches the story of the Exodus.
And then Shechem. You found the remnants of a statue there, and what was the significance of that?
Well, once again, you've heard the verse, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. After the whole story of the Exodus, they come to this location called Shechem, and they renew the covenant. Joshua had them renew the covenant. And there was a stone that was found there. And once again, this other Egyptologist, I haven't found these things, but I found the people who found them as a filmmaker, and I've recorded it. And this stone actually matches the story. Joseph's bones were carried from that. And that tomb, by the way, was empty. There were no bones in it. Well, then this other location is where the bones were supposed to have been placed. And it's only a few hundred yards from where this statue and a temple were. There's great history in these areas. And guess what? It all is matching like a hand in a glove.
And what about Jericho?
Jericho, again, people say, well, there's no evidence. Actually, Jericho was the linchpin for discounting the Bible. And the reason why is because they were looking at the time of Ramesses.
Again, timeline.
But once again, if you look earlier, then all the cities were there, and they all collapsed in this particular period of time. So once again, this earlier time period, that's what the film is exposing.
Wow.
So we're not trying to find, we're not suggesting all the solutions, but we're saying is that there is a pattern of evidence matching 6 major events in the Bible, all the way from them coming in with Joseph, all the way to Joshua and Jericho.
I find it all so fascinating. You know, Tim is a filmmaker, and if you want more, watch his award-winning documentary, Patterns of Evidence. This DVD is available nationwide, but I want to show you this because it's one of the prettiest books I've gotten in a long time. It's called Patterns of Evidence as well. This is available wherever books are sold, and it chronicles and outlines everything in detail that you've talked about today, and of course, much, much more fascinating.
Well, it's now, the DVDs in Walmart and Christian bookstores, and you can go to patternsofevidence.com to find out where you can get these products. So yeah, if you have family members that have questions, this is a great approach, because we don't declare anything. We allow both sides, and you can decide what you hear. But the evidence is very loud.
Faith fortifying.
It is.
Thank you, Tim. Great to have you here.
It's wonderful to be.